Thank you very much, Sabra. And like Sabra, I just want to welcome everybody to this day. And the day is called Marxist Ideas for today. And I would say that if Marx was alive and sat with us in this room, I think it'd be safe to say that he would be absolutely raging. He would be enraged about the treatment of refugees in Calais that we've seen this week. You know, outraged by the French police using bulldozers and tear gas against people who've set up some sort of home there, fleeing from war and persecution and violence. You know, just like us, shocked by all those images of people dead on the beaches or the thousands dead in the sea, turning the Mediterranean into a mass grave. And he'd be standing firm against the racism of the politicians and our rulers who then scapegoat and blame all those people who are seeking refuge. You know, the politicians that have closed their borders to those in need, having bombed them in the first place and forced them so many times to leave their countries. In fact, I think that Marx would be alongside us on a whole range of different issues at the moment, about inequality and poverty. On the demonstration last week, standing against Trident, in fact, we're going to spend 160 billion renewing Trident, that we're still bombing other countries like Syria. He'd be alongside us in the fight to save the environment and try and stop climate change, and supporting the junior doctors' strikes this week. And I start by saying this because obviously Marx was writing over 150 years ago. When one of his early works, which people probably heard of, is the Communist Manifesto. He wrote it in 1848, actually a time when capitalism was just coming into being. But the thing is, in many ways, the features of the world that he was looking at are still with us today. And this is an important starting point, because a lot of the time, one of the arguments you encounter when you say, you know, you're interested in Marx or a Marxist, is people say, well, yeah, his ideas, they're all well and good. Some of them are quite interesting, but really they're not relevant today, are they? The world looks completely different. And of course, you know, we don't really need to say some of the differences. We have the internet, we have mobile phones, we have amazing technology. Of course, there are many differences in the world today than when he was writing. But the reality is that some of the key characteristics of society are still with us. In fact, if anything, they're more pronounced. Because when Marx was writing, back in the 1840s and 50s, actually capitalism was just coming into being. It only existed in a few countries. It's spread across the globe now. There's no part of the world that is not touched by capitalist relations in some way. The idea about profit and competition. And it's also important to start from these things because it's about what motivated Marx. Because there's some people, again, who today maybe accept some of Marx's ideas. They say, oh yes, he was very good at explaining the economic crisis or economics in a general, perhaps dry and academic way. But really he's got nothing to say about oppression or racism. You know, it's this whole caricature, isn't it, of Marx, that he was this old man with a beard, holed up in the British Library, coming out with a mechanical theory. Actually, nothing could be further from the truth. It was Marx's horror of all these things that drove him to analyse capitalism more. And if you read his works, you know, you get a sense, particularly in his early works, of that anger. You know, he talks about capitalism coming into being, dripping with blood. He's talking about the process of people being forced off their lands in the enclosure movement. He talks about colonialism, the pillaging of the world by those at the top. He talks about how brutal slavery is, which he stood against, saying it's the most oppressive of all systems of exploitation. And what was clear to Marx was this sort of brutal process of capitalism coming into being was not something where, you know, you could argue, well, perhaps the ends justified the means, and at the end of it we came out with this nice, fair, lovely new system. It was actually a foretaste of how nasty the system of capitalism would be. And so, like I say, Marx talks about the horrors of this new world coming into being, of how people chucked off the land, sucked into the vast factories and mills of places like Manchester, children of all ages working, women forced to give birth pretty much next to their machinery where they were living. You know, the average age being 16 years old in some of the big cities because life was so difficult and disease so rife. And he makes the point, this was alongside capitalism showing creation of potential wealth, riches that no one had seen, but people forced to live like this. This inequality drove him forwards. He talked of how there's, you know, palaces for the rich, but only hovels for the poor. And at the same time, divisions like we talk now being used. You know, in Marx's day, it was anti-Irish racism that was used to scapegoat and divide people then. But the point is that Marx was more than just this angry individual raging against injustice or writing exposés of the system. He was an activist, but he was also more than an activist. And there's two very important things about him. One is about theory, his theoretical contribution, and the other is his understanding of the need for organisation, how actually theory has to be linked to practice. Now today, as a whole day, it's devoted to Marx's thought and theory, so I think we need to look at this in a little bit more detail. You see, above all else, Marx was interested in social change. He was a revolutionary. Maybe people in the room have heard that really famous quote, philosophers have interpreted the world, the point is to change it. But Marx understood that to be effective, you actually need to understand that system you're seeking to change. Because even when he was writing, he wasn't the only person to be critical of capitalism. There was lots of different groups didn't like this new system. There was a group, for example, called the Utopian Socialists. Marx was really critical of them because he said, look, it's not enough just to imagine a different world. Actually, the crucial question is, how do you get that change? And actually, if you read Marx, and hopefully people are going to have done already or go away from here and read, we've got lots of books on sale over there, but actually you'll see that Marx doesn't actually talk that much about what socialism would be like. He's really focused on an analysis of the current situation. And his method was to look under the surface of capitalism, to try and understand its dynamics. It wasn't enough just to describe that system. And that's what he devoted his time to. I mean, his biggest work was Capital. I mean, he didn't actually even finish it. But it wasn't just an academic exercise. It was because, as he put it, he wrote it, he analysed, because he wanted to hasten the overthrow of capitalism. But this stress on theory is just as important today. Because actually, I think at the moment, among a lot of sections of people, it's quite fashionable to reject theory, to reject the idea that you even need it, by both those on the right of politics and people on the left as well. And the thing is here is that even when people say they're not theoretical, you don't need a theory, maybe they pretend to be neutral, it's not really true. They still have a worldview and an explanation. I mean, I'm sure we're all very familiar with the right-wing version of this. You know, all the sort of common sense arguments that are put to explain why society is in such a mess. You know, the fact it's migrants to blame for wages falling or unemployment, or it's that Muslims are just prone to extremism and terrorism, or that we need bosses because they provide the jobs, or, you know, if it weren't for the rich, there wouldn't be any other money to provide work for the rest of us. All these common sense right-wing arguments, and everything is unconnected. But actually, it comes from the left as well. People sometimes on the left reject the idea of theory. I mean, I don't know if anyone's had the experience, you know, working alongside other people, saying, well, you know, why do you bother going to meetings? Why are you bothered coming today? Shouldn't we just be on the streets, agitating, being active? Isn't that enough? Except I would say if you scratch the surface and talk to people who are activists, of course they have some view of the world. Perhaps it's that, you know, people are naturally selfish. It's just human nature. So there's not much you can do about it anyway. Or the real problem is that most people are uneducated. So we just have to educate everyone. We're a bit more enlightened, we're the activists, but everyone else, they're a bit more stupid. Or really, you know, this is just, you can't change society in the end. You know, maybe you just have to do your own little bit to try and make it a bit better. Maybe just devote yourself to charity work, or maybe we can appeal to those at the top and go, look, it's so terrible, come and help us, you can do something about it as well. The point being is that there are lots of ideas there, and just because people say they don't have a theory, actually they usually do. And really often reflects this common sense view of the world, which is really about how things appear on the surface. And this is really what Marx is looking at, because there's a very big contrast between what appears on the surface and what the actual reality is. And we'll just look at some of the key things that Marx looked at. On the surface, everyone is meant to be free and equal under capitalism. The reality, I don't think I need to point this out, is that if you have money, you're a lot more free, aren't you? You can make a lot more choices. That's quite obvious. But actually, there's still the myth, isn't it, that anyone can rise up, make it big, do all right. You know, everyone can do that. But the reality, under the surface, is a division under capitalism, isn't there? There's a division between the tiny minority, the 1% we might want to call them, who own all of the raw materials, or the factories, or the mines, or the banks, or all the things you need to actually make the things that we need. And the vast majority of us have to go and work for one of them. So, in theory, yes, we're free, we're not slaves, but, you know, we can choose who we work for. But actually, Marx said there's another meaning to the word free. He said that workers, ordinary people, majority of people, are free from having any direct access to all the means of production, the tools that you need to actually turn raw materials into clothes, housing, and food and all the other stuff we need them. We don't have access to them unless we go and work for a capitalist and sell our ability to work. So yeah, we're free to starve if we refuse to work for them. We have to in some way. On the surface, once you're in work, get your job, you're going to get a fair day's pay back for your fair day's work. The reality, again something that Marx looked at in great detail, is that when you get into work, you create far more value for your boss than what you get back in terms of your wage. You get paid much less than the value your work creates in terms of the goods and services that you're making. That extra value, stolen by the boss every day. That's the source of their profits. And this is an important point because it means that exploitation is not some anomaly happening in a sweatshop in Bangladesh or China. It's part and parcel of capitalism. Again, under the surface, we live under a democracy. We get to vote, we elect a government, they have a manifesto to implement what could be fairer. Well, besides the fact we all know they rip up their election commitments, we only have to look at student fees for that one, or they're happy to dispense with democracy. For a time in Greece, they got rid of elections, appointed a technocrat to run it in the way that they wanted to implement the austerity and bailouts. Or sometimes they even keep rerunning elections until they get the result that they wanted. I think in Ireland they had 3 votes around joining the European Union because people kept voting the wrong way until they got the result. But even when a democracy appears to be functioning, the real decisions about what happens in society are not actually made in the House of Commons. They're made in the boardrooms of the vast multinationals, the finance companies. They're the ones that make the decisions about what's going to be made or what they're going to invest. Just think about the steel industry. Who voted to close that down? Except, thousands of people have just been thrown on the dole because of those decisions that have been made. The point being here is if we accept the surface appearance of things, then essentially we're accepting the parameters of capitalism. We're accepting the common sense that this is a natural way of the world, how it's always been, and that it can't be changed. The best you can do is make it a bit better. Marx was about saying, this isn't the way it's always been. Society has been organised differently. It can be organised again differently. Capitalism is a very new system. We've organised very different ways. And actually, that's why history is so important, because the past helps us understand today. And actually, amongst other things, Marxism is a theory of history. But again, when Marx talked about history, he wasn't talking about the facts that you might learn in school or what this king did and that king did. He talked about history being the clash of class struggles, actually about ordinary men and women being agents in that and bringing about change through their own actions. But also, besides these insights, Marx identified what was very different and unique about capitalism, because there had been class societies before capitalism, but there was something also different about capitalism. And that is there's 2 key divisions under the system. The main class divide we've identified between the capitalists and the bosses at the top and all of us. But there's another divide. The capitalists themselves are divided amongst themselves. Marx called them a band of warring brothers. They're united against us, but they fight amongst themselves. And that's because all of them are in competition with each other. They're in competition for profit. And here we see what an absolutely crazy, unplanned and chaotic system we live under. Whether investment happens, or production takes place, or things made, or services provided, it's not a result of any rational decision about what we might need in society. It's about will it make a profit, and determined by this absolute race between different capitalists to make the most profit as possible. This is locked into the system, profit, and it distorts everything. The profit motive distorts our education system. It distorts healthcare. It distorts our ability to even deal with climate change. Actually, you can see how competition fuels war, how war is locked into capitalism. It's that battle for states to control key areas of resources, such as oil in the Middle East, or get access to new markets across the world, or prevent other different states or companies getting them. You can see, therefore, why they go to war. Just think about Britain. Why did it join the bombing of Syria? Because it wanted a place at the table in any subsequent carve-up of the Middle East. And so here we can be clear. All these things that we identify, inequality, austerity, racism, oppression, war and exploitation, actually, many things that existed in Marx's time that are still with us today, they're not aberrations, they're locked into how the system is organised. They flow from the logic of that system. They're not just to do with due to evil, unpleasant, uneducated people, although some of the people at the top are, they are from that logic of how it's organised. And so we need Marxist theory to try and make sense of the world, to understand how these things are connected. Just want to say though, when we talk about theory and about Marxist theory, it is not something that we learn by rote. Do not go away from today thinking that, I'm going to read some Marx, I'll learn it off by heart, then I'll repeat it verbatim, and there we go, I'll be a Marxist. That isn't how Marx works. It's a framework, really, to understand and make sense of the world, a method, if you like. And as such, it's actually been developed by other people since Marx's time. Revolutionaries like Lenin, Trotsky, Rosa Luxemburg, who actually used Marx's understanding of the world and his method then to try and make sense of new situations that they found themselves in. And as part of this, Marx identified a very key contradiction at the heart of the system. He identified that as capitalism spreads across the globe, it creates workers. We've seen how workers are the most exploited class, but Marx also called them the grave diggers of capitalism. He meant they're the force that could get rid of the system. They're not just victims of the system, and actually have potential power to change it. Because although it is a fact that the ruling class, the people at the top, the 1%, own all the workplaces and control all that wealth and make these decisions in a very undemocratic way, it's also true that it's workers and ordinary people do all the work. Build the houses, grow the food, make the clothes, drive the trains, teach the children, clean offices, answer phones, deliver posts, work in power stations. You name it, it's done by workers, isn't it? And if they stop work, nothing happens in society. The profits that drive that system forward don't get made. And so Marx said this gives workers enormous potential power. If they stop work, nothing happens. No profits are made. The fact is, if a boss doesn't come into work, no one notices. They don't usually come into work. But in most workplaces, one worker doesn't come in, you notice because the workload is so much. Never mind a whole workforce not coming in. Nothing is going to happen then. So it's a tremendous potential power and the basis of which society could be run differently. Now, I say potential because of course, those people at the top try and hide this power from us. Tell us that we're powerless. Really, it's the clever elite that run everything and know how to do it. Without them, of course, we'd be lost. We wouldn't know what to do. And sometimes people believe this. We don't think there is anything we can do, or we think, well, I don't agree with that, but everyone else thinks it, so what can we do? But actually, you see glimpses, don't you, of this power. Anyone in London last July, it's the first day of our Marxism festival, actually, 20,000 tube workers went on strike. You couldn't really miss it. Not a train moved. It literally, millions of people had to walk around London or miss a day off work, and business was screaming because it impacted so much. In Greece, it showed the potential power when bosses closed the TV station and they sacked all the workers in the name of austerity. Actually, the workers occupied the TV station and kept on broadcasting. You think, why are they so upset about the junior doctors going on strike? Because they know the impact it will have if they don't go, and thousands of operations won't happen in the same way. And when we talk about revolution, it's these sort of struggles we're talking about on a massive scale, involving millions of workers. And this is key for Marx. It's his most unique idea, the idea of working class self-emancipation. The idea workers themselves can bring about change through their own actions, not just relying on someone else to do it for them. This is in contrast to a lot of the ideas that are prevalent on the left. Often it's, we need to elect someone who'll do it for us, or some different activist, committed activist will bring about change for everyone. Now again, this is actually something, when the people say that Marx is no longer relevant, this is what they bring up. Because they say, well, that's all very good, but hasn't the working class changed? Is it still long, does it even exist, or does it have any power? Now, there's going to be a whole meeting later today on class in the 21st century where we can explore these things in more detail, but the truth is really that, of course, the working class looks different to Marx's day, but it still exists. Capitalism continually restructures. Old industries are destroyed, like we saw the mining industry, but new ones come about. Think of all the call centres or the logistics industry to deliver all the things that are ordered over the internet now, involving van drivers and pickers and packers in vast warehouses. There are new workers thrown up all the time in that way. And so what we don't do is we don't just use Marxism like a mantra and pretend it's all the same, or as when he was writing, we use it to analyse new developments. Actually, it's very important because it was both understanding the dynamics of capitalism and this idea of working class self-emancipation that enabled someone called Tony Cliff, that people may have heard of in this room, who was actually the founder of the Socialist Worker Party, to analyse the nature of Russia under Stalin in the 1950s. At the time, most of the left thought Russia was socialist and progressive. His analysis, based on Marx's ideas, led them to say, actually, this isn't a socialist society, workers have no control, it's divided by class, And it's in competition, maybe not internal free market competition, it's in military competition with the rest of the world. There is exploitation here. This was very important for our party to understand. It also meant that when the Berlin Wall was torn down in 1989, we in the SWP could understand why that would take place. We weren't disorientated and demoralised like a lot of the left were, completely confused. Hang on, these are meant to be workers' states, why are workers rebelling against them? We were able to say, good, false socialism has been destroyed. Let's have a real debate about what socialism and workers' control would really look like in that way. And so these are very important things to enable us to navigate. It's also about our internationalism, flows from the idea of working class self-emancipation. Question of internationalism is a key one at the moment when we're having debates about the European Union. Again, there's a meeting today where people can discuss this more. But for us, we understand that if workers are going to bring about change, you can't just do it within our own country. We need unity on an international level. And when we stand up for refugees or worker struggles in other countries, it's not out of a moral niceness, it's an objective need from the struggle. It's not that we see people as victims, we see them as fighters alongside us in that way, as our brothers and sisters. We understand if we're divided, we're going to be a lot weaker. And the crucial question is here, theory is for everyone. There is not some group of intellectuals in the SWP, it's for everyone here as well. All of us to be able to better understand the world, to try and change it. And it doesn't just come out of someone's head. You see, Marx was actually a materialist. He didn't think that ideas just existed separate from reality, and he didn't think it was just ideas that brought about change in society. Because actually this is quite important, because sometimes people say, oh, don't we just need to change everyone's ideas first? Get rid of the racism, the sexism, homophobia, all the backward ideas in society, and then we can bring about a new society. It's the wrong way round, really. Our ideas are shaped by the world we live in, but ideas can also change. And of course, with Marx, the idea of theory didn't just get dreamed up out of his head. He studied, but he was learning from experience. Actually, the experience of ordinary working class people, the international experience of workers. He learnt from the experience of the first mass workers' movement in Britain, the Chartists in the 1840s. He learned from workers in Paris in 1871, something called the Paris Commune. Workers took over Paris for 6 weeks and ran it themselves. But he learnt you couldn't just bring about change in one city. The national state and all the rest would come and defeat that. So he learned from these, and other people have done that too. Lenin, in the middle of the Russian Revolution, where if you want to think about the need for activism and being on the streets, you might think it's in the middle of a revolution, he breaks off and studies history and writes State and Revolution to try and better understand the tasks ahead of him, to try and learn from his previous battles so he can be more effective in making that revolution and winning people to it in that way. This is not because history just repeats itself in the same way. It doesn't, but we can learn a lot and then apply it to new situations. And of course we need to, don't we? Because none of us are ever going to experience firsthand the Russian Revolution, the only time workers took power and run society for a time. We need to study it and find out what that was like, be inspired by it, but also understand how did Stalin rise up? What were the material conditions that led to that? These are why we have to study and look at things and discuss them. And all of these things help us today to finish up on, because it means that if we have an understanding of the world, it means we're not blown off course when there's new developments going on. Because there's some big new developments in the world. Just think of the last year, Syriza in Greece, or the election of Jeremy Corbyn in the Labour Party. I mean, there's going to be further meetings on these to explore them further, but you think about the experience of Syriza just a year ago when it was elected in Greece. It was a political earthquake. It was a radical left coalition. All the old parties had seen their votes slump. Lots of the arguments on the left in Britain as well was, you should be in Syriza, everyone should get behind them. Except actually it very quickly came up against the institutions of capitalism, of the Greek state and international capital, the banks, the media, the IMF, the EU, the European Central Bank. The pressure was massive. It broke Syriza. Actually, it ended up, even though the population of Greece voted against austerity, actually Tsipras ended up accepting the bailout programme, implementing worse austerity than was originally asked of him. It showed the limits of trying to get change within the confines of capitalist society. If you think about it now, there are lots of arguments, why don't we all join Labour? We welcome Jeremy Corbyn, it's fantastic to see him as leader of Labour Party. Should we join? What we have to do is look at Labour governments, don't we? Learn from the experience of previous Labour governments. Actually, from the fact that every Labour government that's tried to change, bring about change, at some stage has been forced to compromise. It won't play out exactly like in Syriza, but you can imagine they face hostility of the bosses. You can just imagine what would happen if Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell said, we're going to renationalise the railways with no compensation. We're going to bring back the troops from being deployed abroad, get rid of Trident. I don't think the ruling class would sit back and say, OK then. They would mobilise and organise against that government, just like in Greece. So we have to learn about this and understand about the limits to bring change, whilst we welcome these new developments, but also think about what's the force to counter that power of the people at the top. And so to finish up really, the fight for ideas is something that goes through everything that we do as revolutionaries in daily life. Because when we're involved in any struggle against racism, for better pay, to stop hospitals being closed for junior doctors, no struggle is free of different ideas. And if they're not consciously revolutionary ideas, then those common sense ones I was talking about can dominate. That common sense that, well, you've won something, can't win anything more, go back to work. Or they've imposed the contract on junior doctors, nothing you can do, just accept it. Or, I know what, we can't do anything now, we'll wait till 2020 till the next election and Corbyn can do it for us, which would be too late. So today really is part of us trying to get to grips with theory. And I mean, it's called a day school. It's probably not really the right name really, because it's not meant to be a day of lectures where people just listen and, consume. It's actually meant to be, in all the meetings, everyone here to test out ideas, so we can all go back to wherever we've come from, towns, colleges, universities, workplaces, feeling more confident in the arguments we're going to face. Actually, because we want to have a bigger impact. We want to be more effective building a 19th of March demonstration against racism. More effective when we stand up for refugees, or when we're stopping Trident, or taking on climate change. And therefore you see, to be more effective, not only as activists, but actually as revolutionary socialists, as Marxists, who are not just active in our own right, but we seek to win other people. We seek to offer an explanation of the world, which is a guide to action, what worked in the past, what didn't, and win people to that revolutionary understanding of the world to strengthen revolutionary organisation for all the battles we face now and that are coming as well.